All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are on day 24, episode 25, 40 days of 4VKM. And today's episode was a big one, very, very fun one for me. It was the season 2 premiere of 4VKM, and it was released on 2/21/2022. So it was a 2-year delta from the first 4VKM. We had a nice little anniversary there, 2-year anniversary. And, I've talked about the date 2/21 a ton of times. We're going to talk about it some more today. Remember, the 4VKM podcast is going to be starting on 2/21/2024 of this year. So, and that will conclude the 40 days of 4VKM. So this is basically a countdown to another 2/21. So, love that date. Love that date. So, all right, the name of the video is called The Rise and Fall of the Corporation, right? So we've talked about the corporation a bunch of times. Vince McMahon had a corporation, both the company and a stable that he was in the WWE. We had the corporation of the United States that kind of runs everything here. So a lot of corporation talk, and this is the rise and fall of the corporation. So kind of how it started and where it's going from there, right? So the video starts off. It's a Trump rally in Arizona. And this was after the last episode, which we had put out on November 19th. And then the next episode was 2/21/22. So within that space, Trump had a rally in Arizona. And I got to say, I was shocked with what I had seen at that rally. They had a video made, and he's now used The Undertaker's theme song a couple times at various rallies. But basically, they have this montage of all these Joe Biden, slip-ups and gaffes and all the stuff, right? And if you go back and I kind of show you the comparison of the previous 4VKM episode at the beginning there, where we're showing all Biden's gaffes, falling down the stairs, inflation tie, all this stuff, right? It's in his video, so I almost felt like they were copying me. They're even using a wrestling theme song, The Undertaker's theme song of all people, and it was just super cool. They played that at the rally. People loved it. They were talking about it on social media afterwards, and I'm sitting there like, yeah, Trump wrestling comms. I love it. I love it. So you kind of go down the list of every, blunder that Joe Biden has had up to this point. And this would have been end of 2021, beginning of 2022, that he was doing this rally. And one of the buzzwords that keeps getting used, the phrases that keep getting used, was inflation was the highest it's been in 40 years. There's that 40 years again, right? 40 years. Inflation, highest in 40 years. You heard it a million times, right? Linda McMahon, we've talked about her. She is running the America First PAC for Trump at this point. She was Small Business Administration. Now she's doing America First PAC. And they put out a video. And in that video, they're talking again, the inflation the highest it's been in 40 years. But the video, it was a pinned tweet until just very recently. And in the pinned tweet, it said, the best is yet to come. And then she says that in the video, the best is yet to come. Where have we heard that before? We heard that at the State of the Union. We heard that in the drops before the State of the Union. And when Trump ended on that note, everybody was like, oh, nice little nod to Anons there. But Linda McMahon, the interesting part for me as I'm watching this, she posts that as her pinned tweet. And then a couple minutes later, randomly, she replies in the tweet. And she tags A1 Policy on X, which is the PAC that she runs. But what's the timestamp on the PAC tweet? It's 6/17. Oh, that's like my number there, right? So again, I felt a little shout out to Linda McMahon. But what was she also talking about? 6/17. This was in 2021 that she did this, or 2022. The time was 6/17. What else is relevant with 6/17? Well, later this year in 2022, on June 17th, 6/17, that's when Vince McMahon would resign from WWE as the CEO. So, and then he made an appearance that night on Monday Night Raw as well. So, you have the 6/17 connection. It's very interesting, to me at least. So, you got the best is yet to come. You have all these, it's basically the video that I showed. They're showing Biden being a fool on the world stage. Remember when he met the Pope? Remember when he went to the UK? He's just a clown, right? So, it's a nice little mirror right there in those videos. So then we're going to get into Jessie the Body Ventura, right? Talked about him a couple times. What was Jessie known for? He had that television show, Conspiracy Theories, right? I think that's the name of it, Conspiracy Theories with Jessie Ventura or something like that, where he would look at all these different conspiracy theories and try to debunk them. There's actually a very interesting episode where he has Alex Jones on, and Alex Jones is warning him about a virus that's going to be released, and then they're going to release a vaccine to go along with it. And it's very interesting, to say the least. And that was years and years ago. But Jessie Ventura, remember I had mentioned Donald Trump instituted the rule on Monday Night Raw when he owned it briefly, where there wouldn't be a general manager, but they would do guest hosts instead, right? So they have Jessie Ventura, who is brought in as a guest host, and he kind of had an off and on relationship with WWE. He actually sued Vince McMahon back in the day. He tried to set up a union in wrestling, and Vince didn't want to have anything to do with that. They kind of had some bad blood, but at the end of the day, Vince McMahon always does what's best for business, right? So, Jessie Ventura comes back, guest host, Monday Night Raw, advertising his conspiracy theories show. And at the beginning of that show, he's backstage with Vince, and he goes, I can imagine a lot of conspiracies here in the WWE with you in charge. Well, what have I been saying all this time, right? So, there's Jessie Ventura saying it right there. So, Jessie Ventura is a big JFK fan. He wrote the book, They Killed Our President. He's actually about to go introduce RFK Jr. at a rally coming up pretty soon. He basically endorsed him the other day. So you got that right there. So we go into a JFK clip. It's his Secret Society speech that he talks about. And we have the parts where he's talking about censorship and them seizing power and, all that stuff, right? And you kind of see a correlation with the real life events, like how they used COVID and 9/11 and all this other stuff. 9/11 was, what came out of 9/11? Well, go to the airport now. What happens? You get molested by TSA, right? They give you a little junk check if you're a guy sometimes, right? It's insane. So you have TSA now with their abuses of power. You have, look at all the power that they tried to seize through COVID. They tried to tell people what to do during that, what businesses could be open, what businesses cannot be open. So it was a power grab. Both of those exercises were power grabs on the American people. Patriot Act, right? If you remember The Departed with Alec Baldwin. So, thinking of COVID, when the fans first went away, I thought WWE would lead from the front and kind of be the first sports organization that was back with fans. That didn't happen. There was a couple people who did that before WWE did. But the reason why I thought that is because they were the first after 9/11. So 9/11 and, first show back was led by Vince McMahon in the ring giving a speech. First show back from COVID was led by Vince McMahon giving a speech. So I was curious. I said, well, I wonder, just for the hell of it, we like to look at stuff when it interests us, whether it's gematria or dates or whatever. So I'm like, let me take a look. How much time had passed between those two events? I felt like they were markers for some reason, right? The speech after 9/11, the speech after COVID, where Vince says, as we emerge from this dreadful pandemic. So I take a look at it, and I don't notice anything at first, right? Days, nothing resonates with me. Months, nothing resonates with me. Hours, nothing resonates with me. And I'm about to close the page, right? And then I see 617 million seconds. And I'm like, wow, right? So then I'm doing some math, and 617 million seconds basically would have been those 2 whole days of WrestleMania. WrestleMania was a 2-day event that year. And from the time that they had done 9/11, the speech after, to the time that Vince did the speech after COVID when they returned, it was 617 million seconds. Now, you could say that's a reach, right? But it doesn't change the fact. It was 617 million seconds. You guys could go look it up yourself on Date Calculator. So I thought that was very interesting. And I'm in the crowd too. And in this scene, I got my 4VKM sign that makes TV as they go to the opening of the show. So, it's very cool for me. You had Linda at 617. You have Vince retire on 617. You see that in a future episode. But the woman that's suing Vince right now in the whole lawsuit, when was her first day? 61719, right? Wow, what are the odds of all this, right? So, I don't know. I feel like there's something going on with that number, but maybe there's nothing going on with that number. It is the mirror of 716, though, and we know what happened with that. So, going back to Jessse Ventura, he did the book, They Killed Our President. He was also in the military. He wasn't necessarily, I don't believe he was actually a Navy SEAL, but he was around the Navy SEALs. He had some sort of involvement. I think he was a Marine. But who created the Navy SEALs? It was JFK. JFK created that unit. And Jessse Ventura always repping the U.S. Navy SEALs. So I thought that was a nice little interesting tie-in there. We show you some clips of the fake news, right? Or kind of the pretend news, actually, in this instance, right? BNN, as, a couple different meanings of that. So back during the Monday Night Wars, they would have these skits with Billionaire Ted, on WWF TV, and they'd be attacking the WCW guys, right? Hulk Hogan would be, they'd have an old version of Hulk Hogan, an old version of Randy Savage. They'd have their own Larry King, right? And they used BNN. And they actually did this in 2005 when Shawn Michaels was feuding with Hulk Hogan. They had the fake Larry King, BNN, because they can't say CNN, right? But the logo's the same, BNN. But what else is BNN, right? Barstool Sports. When they're covering the elections, right, and they're in election mode, right, their newscast is called BNN, right? So just showing you that, parallel similarity right there, or synchronicity if you want to call it that. We also show you the Hunter Biden GTV. Just Google search Hunter Biden GTV, and you'll see all the information about the laptop from hell. I don't recommend looking at the laptop from hell. You probably won't sleep for a little bit. So it's very interesting. But again, going back to 1999, WWF had that storyline angle where what they never really had a resolution to, and that was called GTV. And GTV was basically hidden cameras that would, basically catch people in compromising positions. Kind of sounds like the laptop from hell a little bit, right? And kind of how GTV is putting all that information out 22 years later, 23 years later. So it gets a little crazy, right? Weapons of mass destruction, right? Another deception that they had thrown at us while George W. Bush was the president. Colin Powell, all these guys, right? Weapons of mass destruction, right? Well, Big Show, who was a wrestler in WWE, big giant guy, right? He used to come out with a shirt that said WMD, Weapons of Mass Destruction. And his finishing move, which was a punch, imagine getting punched by a giant, it was called the WMD, right? So I show a clip of him. He's got his arm around Big Johnny, they call him, John Laurinaitis, who is also in the news now because he's the other defendant in the Vince McMahon lawsuit. What are the odds of that? I show you Big Johnny with the Big Show on 2/21/22. And in that ring, in that segment, Big Show is talking to somebody, and he's really talking about John Cena, but he tells this person, he goes, "You should be worried about John." And I agree. But not the John Cena that you're thinking about, the other John. I show you JFK Jr. unveiling George magazine, right? So, that kind of leads now into the corporation part. 2/21/1871. This scene has George Carlin narrating it. Very famous speech that he gave about the real owners of the United States or the world, right? And so I kind of show you in WWE how they've done this, right? So who are the real owners for the corporation, right? You have the Crown, right? You have the Blue Bloods, as they call it, right? So there's actually two wrestlers that teamed together, and they were called the Blue Bloods in WCW. It was Triple H and William Regal, right? So they were these two pompous, royal people, the Blue Bloods, we call them. So you have the Blue Bloods. You've got the Pope, the Vatican, right? There's actually a wrestler in WWE called the Pope, Elijah Burke. Well, he was actually called Elijah Burke. He was the Pope in other companies there, but he's introduced by Vince McMahon. And then you have Saudi Arabia. Don't forget about that. They were one of the sides of the triangle, right? And Saudi Arabia, WWE had that partnership with them. They do the shows called The Crown Jewel from there. We've had a couple episodes on that. So, again, how did the corporation get set up? It got set up in the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871. So go look that up. That's basically what made D.C. its own little, city-state, whatever you want to call it, similar to the Vatican, similar to London, the city of London. And that's kind of how they consolidated power within the swamp. The District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871. When was that founded? It was founded on 2/21/1871. That's when it was signed into law by President Ulysses S. Grant. So, showing you all that, remember we talked about the Crown, we talked about the Blue Bloods, the Royals, right? So who owns the corporation? The City of London, right? And what was WWE doing in the City of London? Remember in one of the last episodes, I was telling you about the name change and the plane ride from hell? Well, actually, that plane ride from hell was coming back from this event. It was called Rebellion, and it was on May 5th, 2002. So they ran 2 pay-per-views over, they had 3, Carnage and something, Capital Carnage or something like that. But what they had was 2 pay-per-views that they would do over in the UK for the WWF. And one was called Rebellion, and the other one was called Insurrection, right? Insurrection. I mean, that was a big word the last couple of years. And isn't it interesting that, we're telling this story about how UK kind of still has control over the corporation, and Vince McMahon is running shows over in the UK called Rebellion and Insurrection, which basically mean the same thing, right? So he didn't use those shows at all in the United States. Those shows were only used in the UK, which was very interesting, right? So as Carlin's going on, he's kind of talking about how these guys own everything, right? They own all the land, they own the politicians, they own the corporations, the other businesses out there. And kind of where I show you is, well, who owns them now, right? And that kind of ties back to the executive order that President Trump dropped off on 12/21/2017. 12/21, take it away. Epstein Island burns away. That 12/21/17 with Cappy, who we show in this video as well. So you see Gates. Bill Gates kind of has all the land, right? Well, what if his assets get seized? Then who has all the land there? You have the corporations. Well, what's happened for, many years since that executive order? You had tons of CEOs of these multinational corporations resigning, right? So what was going on there? And then how many politicians have resigned in that period too? You see the list from the drops, right? Of all the politicians that have resigned or quit or whatever, that decided not to run for re-election. And at the same time, I'm showing you Kane. Remember, he's the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee. President Trump recently gave him an endorsement in Iowa and said he could be the next governor of Tennessee if he wanted to. And Kane said no comment, right? So look for corporate Kane to be governor of Tennessee in the near future. I'm calling it. And he'll probably have Undertaker out there on the campaign trail stumping with him, which will be fun. So you have Kane choke slamming a politician, and as you see all the politicians resigning there, right? So what do we got there? I can't read my handwriting. Antifa in WWE. So I know this episode's all over the place, but what we're showing you is really, it's almost like the best of 4VKM in this video. So it's really more for new people and just showing you all the similarities, the symbolism that is put in WWE that mirrors real life, right? So I had talked about this before. They had that Antifa group in WWE called Retribution. They also had the wrestler Sami Zayn that had the Antifa logo, right? It's like a perfect match. That's in the video too. Now, George Carlin, he's freaking out, or he's not freaking out, but he's now talking about how they control all the media, right? So as he's saying they control all the media, remember, who controls all the media now after 12/21/17? You have, The Rock shows up at the Super Bowl that year. And he does the introduction. He's on the 50-yard line. He does his, Rock's shtick on the mic, right? But as you're seeing that, I show you all the media partnerships that WWE has. Fox, NBC, where John Cena is like co-host the Today Show a lot of times now. Disney, A&E, where they do the documentaries and whatnot, right? So they have their hands in everything there. You also have, look at every sporting event that happens. At every sporting event, any championship game, what ends up happening? The winning team gets presented a WWE Championship belt. So even in that Super Bowl that year, as Roger Goodell is presenting the Super Bowl trophy, you have the WWE Championship in the background, right? Because WWE runs this shit. And sooner than later, people will figure it out, and sooner or later, people will realize why Vince McMahon is public enemy number 2 and Donald Trump is public enemy number 1. Even though I feel like sometimes they go after Vince harder than Trump, but I mean, yeah, respect to both of them for that, right? So, panic in D.C., right? Why is there panic in D.C.? Because they don't have control of this situation anymore. And I show Panic in D.C., that famous, drop that was on 17. And as you're seeing that, you see George Carlin say, "They got you by the balls," right? Which they do. Trump's got them by the balls. 12/21, take it away, right? So, the last thing is we talk about, I was talking about the useful idiots in the media that carry our water and tell the normies our stories that we're telling them, right? And a good example was this lady on, I think it was MSNBC, but she was, again, trying to make fun of us and saying, they think that there's a corporation and the military's going to take down the corporation and the corporation's owned by the city of London. Right? Like, thank you for telling all this. Appreciate it, right? So as she's talking about this, right? Remember the gentleman that went on Good Morning America and said that, basically that we were transitioning to military power, right? And how he had all these police departments and, National Guard and all these people from all around the country to come in and help with that transition. And so what am I showing here? This is one of my favorite clips in 4VKM. It's basically, the big boss man, right? As he's saying, we got the police, we got, the big boss man showing up. We have Goldberg. Remember, Goldberg would walk to the ring with all the cops surrounding him, right? There's a group called the Truth Commission who comes up in a future episode, right? And they're all in military gear, and they're called the Truth Commission, right? Didn't President Trump say that he was going to establish a Truth Commission recently, or about like a year ago? And then we have the Shield, right? The Shield, who they make this big entrance at tribute to the troops on tanks and all this other stuff. And, they have the military code words in the entrance for their theme song. So, you have all these forces coming together within the WWE to help transition to military power. At least that's what I'm showing you in the video. All right, corporation. We're still on corporation here. Did you know? This is where it gets wild, folks. Did you know that the original name for the WWF or WWE, it's WWE now, so the original name, when it very first started by Vince's grandfather, the name of it was Capital Wrestling Corporation. Wow, right? Capital Corporation? What are we telling you? What have I been saying? 2/21/1871. 109 years later, Vince started his corporation, PT 109. That guy. You have it all right there. And then the original name is Capital Wrestling Corporation. They built the Capitol in a corporation. It's in the name of the original WWE. But if that's not enough to convince you, when was the date that they founded this corporation, the Capital Wrestling Corporation? It was January 7th, 1952. 1/7/1952. So you have the Capital Wrestling Corporation, founded on a 1/7, a 17 day, right? By Jessse McMahon, Roderick Jessie McMahon, I think it was. And what day did he die? He passed away on 11/22/1954, 2 years later, right? So it's wild. It's just weird. Then you have the WWF is what became of the Capital Wrestling Corporation. And when did that happen? That happened in 1963. Vince's father, Vincent J. McMahon, he changed it to the Worldwide Wrestling Federation. And then from there, 17 years later, 1980, is when Vince changed it. He founded his version of the company, Titan Sports, which then acquired the WWF, and the rest is history. And that happened on 2/21/1980, South Yarmouth, Massachusetts, 18-minute drive away from the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport. Wow. But there's nothing happening. So that's kind of the start of the corporation right there, the WWF Corporation, before Vince had it, right? I mean, so you got to ask yourself, how long was this in play? How long was this happening, right? I don't know. Maybe it's just all coincidence. So, going back to 11/22, we know JFK had gone out on 11/22. 27 years after that on 11/22, remember 27 equals JFK, 11/22/1990, you had The Undertaker debut in WWF, the Survivor Series. And he was accompanied to the ring by a manager who went by the name Brother Love. Brother Love is played by an individual named Bruce Pritchard, who was Vince McMahon's essentially right hand for many, many, many years in WWE up until Vince left recently. He's still there now, but now they're trying to go after him because he's a Vince guy, right? Of course they are. So anyway, he does a podcast with Conrad Thompson. It's called Something to Wrestle. And, Conrad and him are doing an episode on the steroid trials, I believe it is. And, all that whole period where Vince was in court and being sued by the federal prosecutors were trying to put him in jail. They're trying to lock him up. And at the same time, too, you have these hit pieces in the media, right? Kind of sounds familiar to what's going on right now. And in those hit pieces, you have Geraldo Rivera, that's stiff. And you also have Donahue. You remember Donahue? And as I'm watching the Donahue clip, what's interesting to me is that at that point, the WWF had generated $1.7 billion in revenue. And he's losing his mind over it. He goes, $1.7 billion, right? Or as I like to call it, Q billion dollars, right? So you have Donahue losing his mind there. And Conrad Thompson, he asked Bruce Pritchard, he goes, do you think the federal government put them up to this as far as the media goes, right? And Pritchard goes, absolutely. They absolutely did, right? Now, what's interesting is in Geraldo's hit piece, it was called Wrestling Ring of Vice, right? So Wrestling Ring of Vice hit piece. What's the hit piece 30 years later? It's Vice, Dark Side of the Ring, right? And who owns Vice? GS, George Soros. He owns a big part of it, right? So it's kind of very interesting. And they're one of the media outlets that just came out with some of this Vince stuff as well. So damn you, Vice. Damn you to hell. So, from there, during that, before Hulk Hogan left WWF, he did a sit-down interview with Vince McMahon. And Hogan has this great phrase that could be applied today. He goes, there's a lot of tabloid terrorism out there. And he's talking about the fake news, essentially, and all the fake news attacks that they've been dragged through, right? So I show you the clip of VK on Twitter, on X, where he says, the MSM must fall for the masses to awake, or something to that agree. So we can't have what we want until the MSN is dead, right? Which seems like they're getting closer. You see a clip in here. This is 2022. It says 58% of people believe that the news is fake. And that number, I'm sure, is much higher now. You have Hogan talking about how these people, these tabloid journalists, they're only out for themselves and to get a good story. And in a lot of instances, they're paid off or whatnot. They're paid henchmen to a degree. And kind of give you a couple examples there. Dave Meltzer, talked about him. He's blocked me on X. He's a loser. He just makes shit up, basically, and then he gets people to pay him to subscribe to his make-believe, fantasy booking that he does. Pure speculation. Not to say he doesn't have any sources, but he's wrong more times than he's right. But unfortunately, this is who the fake news goes to anytime there's a big wrestling story. He's like their guy. So they go to him, and, he feeds their bullshit that they want to hear, right? He gets probably chipped off a couple bucks, and he keeps the Ponzi scheme going, right? He has a little buddy, Brian Alvarez, right? You see Brian Alvarez, he was out there shilling when the whole Chris Benoit situation happened. Again, my take on a lot of the I've never talked about the Chris Benoit situation, but what I always find fascinating, is when a wrestler dies, the media just absolutely goes ballistic on the WWE, right? Like, with the exception of one, Bray Wyatt, they did not have a media firestorm when Bray Wyatt passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And, that's interesting to me because he was very young, right? So they didn't use this as one of their classic examples of a superstar that passed away too young, even though he was very young. I think he was like 36 years old. He's like my age, right? So I always find it interesting. But anybody else, even if they're in their 50s, 60s, whatever, they make this big media storm and they turn all their assets against WWE. And that's kind of what makes me question some of this stuff, right? So when the Chris Benoit stuff happened, immediately the narrative was steroids. Like, that's their go-to. That's what they came after Vince for years ago and tried to put him in prison, right? So they bring that back up. They're like, oh, it's steroids. It's unsafe. And I watch it and I'm like, this is a media narrative now. This isn't somebody lost their life, a family lost their lives, a horrible incident happened. This is about how do we take down WWE a peg. That's what they always turn it into, right? And that the same thing is happening now with this Vince stories. They're just, and then when you see some of the people pushing it, now, how far are they going? They're saying, oh, we got to take out anybody that any association with Vince McMahon now, right? You're hearing this from some of these same yellow journalists, and, what are they trying to do? They're trying to hurt the WWE business, flat out, right? They want to take Triple H out, I see him say. They want to take out anybody that had anything to do with Vince McMahon, which, sorry, it's everybody that's ever worked in WWE. So, essentially, what are they trying to do? They're trying to erase the history of the WWE. And you know what? I'm not going to let it happen. A lot of other people aren't going to let it happen either. So stay tuned on that. That's why the 4VKM podcast is going to be so important. But anyway, going back to the story, Hogan's going through all these tabloids, right? We know what happened with him in the Gawker situation. They released a sex tape about him, I think, or something like that. And then, him using some very bad words. So who's he partner up with? Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel, PayPal Mafia, right? X.com. And Peter Thiel funds Hulk Hogan's lawsuit against Gawker because Gawker, I believe, actually outed Peter Thiel as a gay man. And he didn't want that out. So he was waiting for his revenge. gets his revenge via Hulk Hogan, and they sue Gawker into oblivion to the point where they don't exist anymore, right? They went bankrupt, I believe. Gawker, dead, right? They got the big boot and the leg drop from Hogan. So Hogan, I think, got like $115 million in that deal. So good for him. You also have Dave Portnoy, right? So Hogan's talking about all this other stuff. They did the same thing to Dave Portnoy as Business Insider, right? Cherry pick. They find a girl. They cherry pick some stuff about it. Try to create this hit piece that he's some sort of sick pervert monster, right? They tried it to Elon Musk. They've done it to Donald Trump 100 times, and now what are they doing? They're doing it with Vince McMahon again, right? So these people are sick, and there's this incestuous relationship between the lawyers, the folks in the media, and then elements of the government that are trying to manipulate a certain outcome, right? So they try to first try the case in the court of public opinion before they bring it to trial. And I mean, that's the playbook that they do. And Dave tried to sue Business Insider like Hogan did Gawker, but he wasn't as successful. But again, how is the MSN going to fall? I think ultimately they're going to fall on lawsuits. They're just going to get sued into oblivion to the point where they got nothing left. They have to close or they're sold for pennies on the dollar. All right. So from there, after talking about the the lawsuits and the fake news and the tabloid terrorism, as we like to call it, we transitioned to George Magazine, right? Which, Junior had unveiled in 1995, I believe it was, 94, 95. And, there's a phrase that he used in his speech unveiling George where he says, we're not going to cover politics, we're going to celebrate it, right? So I talked about this Chris Jericho return video that was being done in 2007, 27 JFK, and it had all these coded messages in it, and there was coded messages like Coast Rescue and Save Us 222, and one of it would show Rev 22:12, right? Revelation 22:12 from the Bible, right? So you have all these coded messages. What does it mean, right? So let's fast forward, July 1999. I talked about this briefly, but now I'm going to give you the full timeline of this line of events, right, between WWE and JFK Jr. in July 1999. So we start off Stone Cold Steve Austin, right? Stone Cold equals 107. There's that number again, right? So on 7/5/99, Vince McMahon basically challenges Stone Cold Steve Austin, who had just regained the WWF Championship, and he says, somebody's got to go and go for good, right? And this is around the same time where Junior gives one of his last interviews to that online golf channel, I think it is, and he's in his crutches. He goes, yeah, I'm in crutches, was playing sports, and, be tied up for a little bit. So, what was on the cover of George Magazine in July of 1999? Politics and wrestling. So Salma Hayek is on the cover, and then it talks about Goldberg and politics on the front page. And then as you open it up, you have Stone Cold in there, you have Vince McMahon in there, and you have really all of these WWF little things, right? You have actually Vince McMahon. There's a picture in there of Vince McMahon, Shane, and maybe Stephanie with an American flag behind them. This is George Magazine, July 1999. But there's nothing going on with this WWE stuff. So, in the last line in the article about wrestling, one of the lines in there is, they're talking about how they both are populist movements, right? Like, WWF and WCW at the time, they kind of represent populism, right? It's all about giving the people what they want, and they'll bring outsiders in like Dennis Rodman and Karl Malone and Mike Tyson and WWF, and they'll band together to just create an amazing product, right? And he basically, the last line in it is, politicians ignore at your own peril. I mean, the warning is in there. You want to laugh about WWE and wrestling? Well, as Vince McMahon once said, he who laughs last laughs best. So we'll see how that happens, right? So now going back to the timeline, right? That's all the July 1999 edition of George Magazine. On 7/12/99, Vince McMahon, now the week before he was fine, right? On 7/5, Raw was pre-recorded. Now on 7/12, he comes out in a wheelchair, right? And it was because on the 4th of July, 4/7, put them together, you get 47, you get John. But on the 4th of July, Vince McMahon got in that motorcycle accident I told you guys about, where he was going 45 miles per hour. Couldn't have been 55. Well, 55 would have worked too, but it wasn't 50, it wasn't 40, it was 45. Of course it was, right? Now, go back to that Jericho clip that I was showing you earlier. Save us 222. That flashes up multiple times, right? Save us 222. Well, is there any significance? Is there any tie-in to 222 and like Junior or any of that stuff? How about the fact that his plane crash happened on 7/16/99, and if you look at the dates between 7/16/99 and 2/22/2022, it's 22 years, 222 days, exactly. So, very strange. Save us 222. Save us 222. So, you know, it's just wild how it lines up with that. What else were they showing you in those clips? Coast Rescue, Second Coming, right? Who are we talking about? Are we talking about Chris Jericho, or are we talking about somebody else here? Now it ended up being Chris Jericho, right? But again, when you advise and you go through history, you have decades to kind of, you know, let this stuff marinate, and then you dig into it and you see stuff like 222 days, 22 years from the date to 222. I mean, it's just wild to me. It's wild to me. And don't forget, this video came out on 2/21/222. So that was the next day after this video came out. So now going back to the timeline, 7/19 is when the search ends. Remember, we were talking about Shane's helicopter crash. Shane's helicopter crash happened on 7/19/2017. So 18 years to the day that the Coast Rescue search ended. On that same day, you have Vince McMahon, again, saying somebody's got to go and go for good between him and Stone Cold, right? But that day, during the day, you had Jessie Ventura show up, and he's doing a press conference with Vince McMahon, and he's introduced by Vince because Jessie, who's the governor of Minnesota at the time, he is going to be the special guest referee for the main event at SummerSlam that year. So, you know, it's kind of wild, right? Jessie Ventura shows up in WWE the day that the search for JFK Jr. ends, right? So then you have 7/22. What happened on 7/22? You had the burial at sea. Burial at sea, there's the Tiffany blue box, right? They put the ashes in the Tiffany blue box, allegedly, threw it off into the water, and it was a military ceremony, which Junior wasn't in the military, so that part doesn't make sense. And of course, how many members of the Kennedy family were on the boat for this event? 17. Where was the search radius outside Martha's Vineyard when they were looking for him? 17 miles off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. So 7/23 was the mass, the memorial mass in I think St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. It's one of the big churches in New York. Muhammad Ali was there. Muhammad Ali, the great one, the people's champion, right? The Rock took that from Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali gave him his blessing. to be the People's Champion. But, you know, it's very interesting. Muhammad Ali was involved at WrestleMania 1. You have a scene, I show you a picture of a young junior, like a adolescent junior, actually meeting Muhammad Ali, right? So all those years later, he was at his funeral. And then we're showing you George News, right? The guys on Telegram, those guys. They had a very interesting post. And they were talking about 117.22. And I think the first one said, where were you on 117.22? And then they wrote, wait and see. So wait spelled W-E-I-G-H-T instead of W-A-I-T. And then they also say January 17th, once made public, will be historic, right? So what happened on 117? We still don't know. But around the same time, our boy VK, he posts the picture of 7-Eleven. Don't forget Elon. Elon had that post of the 7-Eleven, and the gas prices, I think, were 7-Eleven or something like that, right? Now, going back to 117, what is 117? 117 in Gematria is Fully Loaded. That's the event that's happening in July 1999, where they're having the end of the era match, where if Undertaker versus Stone Cold, and if Undertaker loses, Vince McMahon's got to go. If Stone Cold loses, he never gets another title shot again. So the event is 117, Fully Loaded. Undertaker is 117. Now, one of the Gematria things I had learned from Negative 48 is that when you have two numbers that are the same to start or end, you can combine those, right? So a 117 is actually also a 27, right? Because you would add the two ones. 27, like we always mention, it's JFK. Or it's red. You know, the red tie, the red line, red. So you have Undertaker, 117, Fully Loaded, 117. George just said, hey, 117 is when it comes down, it's going to be historic. VK is tweeting 7-Elevens, right? Now, then 222. Go back to 222. The year 2022 is the year we're in. What else is happening with Undertaker and Stone Cold Steve Austin? That had this match on 7/25, right? So this is now just 2 days after the mass, right? And now Vince is finishing up his story because Undertaker loses that match and Vince McMahon has to go. So they're doing that match. Fast forward to 222, the year, and Undertaker is going into the Hall of Fame WrestleMania weekend. What city is that WrestleMania in? Where's he going into the Hall of Fame? Dallas. Of course he is, right? So Undertaker's going into the Hall of Fame in Dallas. And guess who else is coming back that they're trying to get at this point? It wasn't official when this video came out. But they're actually trying to get Stone Cold Steve Austin to wrestle for the first time in 19 years at this WrestleMania in Dallas as well. And they were successful and they got him, right? Now, in the video, 2 months before WrestleMania, I show Austin come out, his music hits from the last time he was in Dallas at WrestleMania 32 and he came out. So the glass hits, right? And then I put up there, nothing can stop what is coming because that equals 316 in Gematria. Now, imagine my surprise as I leave WrestleMania 38 in Dallas and I get home or I get back to the hotel and I'm checking on social media and whatnot. And they say that Austin's music hit, the glass broke exactly 3 hours and 16 minutes into that show. I mean, that's just nuts, right? Nothing can stop what is coming. Go back and watch this video. The glass breaks. 316 pops up on the screen. Nothing can stop what is coming. So, you know, the timekeeper, very, very important job in WWE. So we wrap up. So 7/25, Vince loses, end of the era. 2 days after Junior's mass, where he's gone, right? The whole month they're laying out this whole end of the era story. I show you a reminder of the Ultimate Warrior's plane crash promo. So if you haven't checked that out, go check that out. Ultimate Warriors 203. And we also know that End of an Era First Blood is 203, which was the name of the match that they were doing at Fully Loaded. So the next day after Fully Loaded, 726, you have good old JR wearing his black hat. And he's in the ring. And Stone Cold calls him into the ring to wish Vince McMahon off. And, JR leads the whole group in na 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 na. Oh, hell yeah. Goodbye. And the whole arena is singing it. And Vince storms off. And before he leaves, Austin flips him the double bird, right? Crowd goes crazy. And what I'm showing you here in this clip, right, is what ends up happening. You have, a couple side-by-sides. You have Vince. I cartoonized them. So you have Vince. You can see the side of his head. Very distinct hairline, right? And we also show you Junior, side of his head. Very, very almost identical hairline. Not saying they're the same person. A lot of people assume that's what I'm saying. Not saying that. Is it possible that maybe he's played Vince in the past? I could see that. I think he's played a lot of people, right? Ultimately, what ends up happening, and this isn't in the video, but I don't know, maybe 40 days, close to 40 days after Vince leaves, he comes back. He comes back as a good guy. So, they told the same story all throughout July 1999, End of an Era. One of the guys comes back. Does the other guy come back? I guess we have to wait and see, right? So, that's the episode. A really good one. Hope you guys enjoy it. Make sure to check it out. The link below. Rise and Fall of the Corporation. 4VKM. Find it on Rumble. I don't think it's on YouTube anymore. It's too good for YouTube. Don't forget, sign up for VKM Podcast. We just hit 500 subscribers yesterday, so thank you to those 500. Please share it. Subscribe if you haven't already. That's a separate channel that we're going to try to launch where we will do the podcast exclusively on there and on Rumble and on other places because we love Rumble. Don't forget to check out 4VKM.com where you can watch all the episodes in order. And, we got, I think, 17 days left in the 40 days of 4VKM, or 17 days till 222. I don't know. It's around there. So stay tuned, and as always, enjoy the show.